Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to part 3. I want to go back, and every week I do just a quick reminder of the previous ones that we went through. Todd Bolsinger tells us we need to understand that grief and loss and change are interrelated, but not always the way that we think. Going to the next slide. Book 1, the locked door and the empty house. The empty house. Meanwhile, where is God? This is one of the most disquieting symptoms. He says, when we go to God's house and everything's going well, God invites us in, we have this great party. But when we are shattered, when we are hurting and we go to God's house, when we arrive at the door, we see the door closed, we hear the door locked, and then we hear a second bolting of the door. Next. So book 2, Memories Betrayed, a Cosmic Sadist. What is memory? Is it fact, fiction, a little of both? What is the worst memory we have of God and why? Next. All right, the drill. Why do I make room in my mind for such filth and nonsense? Do I hope that if feeling disguises itself as thought, I shall feel less? Aren't all these notes the senseless writhings of a man who won't accept the fact that there is nothing we can do with suffering except to suffer it? Who still thinks there is some device, if only he could find it, which will make pain not to be pain? It doesn't really matter whether you grip the arms of the dentist chair or let your hands lie in your lap. The drill drills on. How many of you ride a roller coaster with your hands in the air? How many of you ride with your hands on your lap? How many of you close your eyes? How many of you open your eyes? None of those things are going to change the actual roller coaster. But you are trying to change your perception, your thoughts. It's the same thing with the dentist. Next. No longer shut and bolted. He's beginning to see in this process, and that's exactly what it is. It is a process that is taking him where he needs to be. Next. Matthew 7:7-8. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. He who seeks finds. And to him who knocks, the door will be opened. Revelation 3:19-20. Those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. So be earnest and repent. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. God is always saying that if he knocks, we need to let him in. And if we knock, he will let us in. And yet when C.S. Lewis said, I got to the door and I saw it closed, and then I heard the lock, and then I heard it double bolted. This goes against what we have heard and what we cling to in the scriptures. Next. H was a splendid thing, a soul straight, bright, and tempered like a sword, but not a perfected saint, a sinful woman married to a sinful man, two of God's patients not yet cured. I know there are not only tears to be dried, but stains to be scoured. The sword will be made even brighter. Suffering produces, and we go through that whole thing that St. Paul says when he reminds us that everything that we are going to is leading us where we need to be. Now, does anyone except a masochist want to go through the process of purification? When we are hurting, we know that in our minds, 1 week from today, 2 weeks from today, 3 weeks from today, we know that we will feel better. We know that at some unknown point in the future, we will be able to get on with our life. Yet at this moment, we either reject that, even though we know it to be true, or we don't want to accept it as true, or we choose to forget it. And as we look at this, we begin to argue what truth is. It is not enough to just know truth in our heads, because we know the truth to be that in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. But part of that is because we don't want to get over the pain. Because to get over the pain makes us feel like somehow we are saying something about the one we lost, that they don't mean as much to us as we told them they did. For about 20 years, I served on the bioethics board at Polymomy. During that time, when we got called in, it usually meant that there were two parties in the family. And often the individual, by the way, was beyond medical salvation. But one group in the family said, we cannot disconnect so-and-so. And the other half said, it's time to let them go. And we would get called in to listen to them and listen to the doctor and listen to everybody else and somehow do the wisdom of Solomon by cutting the baby in half. It was never easy because I understood what they were saying. If I take someone off life support, is that saying that I don't love them as much as I said they did? And often they would say, we're praying for a miracle. And I always kept my mouth shut, but the real miracle would be if you disconnected them from life support and they survived. The miracle is not the life support. But this is where we transition this when someone dies. The moment I bury them, the moment I scatter their ashes, the moment that I clean the clothes out of the closet, the moment that I vacuum something up that they left behind, the moment that I acknowledge that this has taken place, what does that say about me and the love that I professed and the vows that I made? Next slide. But, oh God, tenderly, tenderly, already month by month and week by week, you broke her body on the wheel whilst she still wore it. Is it not yet enough? Can you answer this? Which is better, to lose someone quickly without warning or slowly over time? And the answer, of course, is neither. But you see, when we're confronted with one reality, we would often say, if only it had been. And this is just our way of saying, I don't like what happened, and I know I have to accept it, but what I'm really saying is, if it had happened differently, I would be more prepared. If it happened differently, I would be okay. If it happened differently, I would be able to make better sense of this. And none of that is true. But we're hoping that something somewhere would have made it more acceptable for us. Next slide. See, the terrible thing is that a perfectly good God is in this matter hardly less formidable than a cosmic sadist. The more we believe that God hurts only to heal, the less we can believe that there is any use in begging for tenderness. So why do we beg for tenderness when it comes to death? Dear God, give them peace. Dear God, let them sleep through the night. Dear God, let me sleep through the night. Dear God, help me understand. If we know this life is temporary and heaven is waiting, Revelation 21:4, should we not be far more accepting of this world's pain? And the answer is no, we still don't like it. And we don't want to go through it because we don't want to have to be purified. We want to get where we're going without the pain, without the suffering, without all of the memories and all of the other things that we have to bear. And so he says, I begged for tenderness. But if God is healing her, in the truest sense of the word, taking that which is a broken, sinful individual and healing her so that she can now be a saint. And this is a necessary process. Then why am I begging for tenderness? And the answer is, it has to do with me more than it does with her or him. Next slide. But suppose that what you are up against is a surgeon whose intentions are wholly good. The kinder and more conscientious he is, the more inexorably he will go on cutting. If he yielded to your entreaties, if he stopped before the operation was complete, all the pain up to that point would have been useless. Here is where we understand the problem of philosophy and asking questions that have no real answer, or at least an answer that we can bear. I remember being a kid, and I was always doing stupid things. And I remember messing up my ankle several times and the doc putting the cast on it and the doc saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and don't do this. And of course, when you are in junior high school, the first thing you say is the doctor doesn't know what he's talking about. And the doctor warned, if you do this, this, and this, you may have to wear the cast longer. But you see, if I don't do this, this, and this, my friends will think I'm a wuss. So I need to do these things so that my friends will think I'm brave and strong. When somebody is going through something, one of the worst things, and I have sat with individuals going through addiction withdrawal, and it is so painful for the person who's sitting with them, because they will make you every promise in the world, thousands of promises, and they'll give you whatever they have. And and you want to believe them when they say, I'm done, I'm never going to do it again, but you have to wait until the entire process is done. Because if you give in, chances are they're going to go right back. And when I say chances, the chances are very high, about 90 to 95% most of the time. Until they have gone through the entire process, any interruption puts them right back in the cycle. They're just a little up here, and then it'll take a few days, and then they're going to wind up right back down there again. And so what C.S. Lewis was saying, he said, I was praying for tenderness, and then I realized if God is healing her, I'm just not liking how he's doing it. Next slide. But is it credible that such extremities of torture should be necessary for us? Well, take your choice. The tortures occur. If they are necessary, then there is no God or a bad one. If they are unnecessary, there is no God or a bad one. If this is a good God, then these tortures are necessary. For no even moderately good being could possibly inflict or permit them if they weren't. Either way, we're for it. Until we have faces. This is another one of C.S. Lewis's classics that hard to read, and yet if you get into it, it's a philosophical book, which is amazing. But in his book, Till We Have Faces, he said, I know now, Lord, why you utter no answer. You are yourself the answer. Before your face, questions die away. What other answer would suffice? If what we are going through is necessary, then there is no way that God can explain it to us, except to be with us in our suffering. Next slide. So as we ask God, is there no God? Are you a bad God? Or are you a good God? What answer would we accept? What answer are we looking for? And how would we know the right answer if it were placed in front of us? This is one of the hardest things in the world. All things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So when someone we love is going through something, and it is a terrible something, and there is nothing we can do to have prevented it, and now there is very little that we can do to actually help them go through what they're going through. How do we know that it actually is going to work for good, except that God has promised it? And how long before it works together for good? And when is that going to take place? And what is the good that it is working toward? And I know all of this is just philosophy, but that's exactly, we are looking for this. Being a kid, back in elementary school in the 60s, everybody in the school would line up to get the various shots. Nobody ever explained to us why. We were just told, line up for the shots. And then they would say, this is a shot for this. And we had really no idea what the shot was for. But nevertheless, we lined up. Everybody got their shot. We moved on. And then we were done. Nobody ever sat down and said, let me show you a picture of what it's like if you get this disease. Let me talk to you about all the bad things that could happen if you get this disease. When we were young, they simply said, this is the way it is. And somebody decided that you should do this. And we just did it. Had they said, this is what will happen if you get the disease, I don't know at 6, 7, 8, 9 years old that I would have had the ability to have made that decision properly. because often I probably would have said, that's never going to happen to me. Therefore, I'm okay. But now we've got a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is, how do I determine that God is telling the truth? Next slide. What do people mean when they say, I'm not afraid of God because I know He is good? Have they never been to a dentist? A dentist is good. A doctor is good. And yet often they inflict tremendous pain on us. Mary told the angel, may it be to me as you have said. Isaiah said, send me, send me. Thomas said, well, you might as well go to Jerusalem and die with Jesus, since that's what's going to happen here. There is a big difference between what we say and what we're willing to do. Thomas said, we might as well go and die with him, and yet when the moment came, Peter even said, I would die rather than fall away from you. And yet when the moment came, they fled. Isaiah said, send me, and yet Isaiah has second thoughts throughout the rest of his book. As Mary was standing at the cross, watching her son die, you wonder if she was ready to take back those words, may it be to me as you have said. There is a difference between saying we understand and truly understanding. Next slide. Unbolting the door. I have gradually been coming to feel that the door is no longer shut and bolted. Was it my own frantic need that slammed it in my face? The time when there is nothing at all in your soul except a cry for help may be just the time when God can't give it. You are like the drowning man who can't be helped because he clutches and grabs. Perhaps your own reiterated cries deafen you to the voice you hope to hear. I was watching one of my vloggers the other day, and they did this beautiful opening shot, but later when they were doing the bloopers, she did exactly what she did, except she got to the door, and when she pulled, nothing happened. Why? Because the door had to be pushed. So they had to go back and refilm it. And I think sometimes, what C.S. Lewis says, maybe God had to bolt the door because at that moment, I was incapable of actually doing what needed to be done. Or maybe it was me that shut and bolted the door. Because again, I couldn't handle what was happening. There's a time that we need to hear things. And if we're not ready, we don't hear them. And then later when somebody says, don't you remember when I told you? And we go, actually, I don't remember that you told me. And the reason I don't remember that you told me is because I literally was out of my mind. And this is something that we just have to accept. So much of what is said, so much of what is tried to be communicated to us does not make sense to us. And sometimes it is though we never actually even heard the words. Next slide. On the other hand, knock and it shall be opened. But does knocking mean hammering and kicking the door like a maniac? And there's also to him that hath shall be given. After all, you must have a capacity to receive, or even omnipotence can't give. Perhaps your own passion temporarily destroys the capacity. He says, unless you have the ability to receive, nobody can give to you. And this is one of those things that I've been to a couple of places lately. Once upon a time, everybody was cash only. Then it was cash and credit card. We got over, this was probably 10, 12 years ago. We went over to the sandwich shop, Kua Aina in Haleiwa. And my kids went running up and they all ordered their sandwiches. And that's when I noticed this sign that said cash only. And I had just enough to buy their sandwiches. And so, it was one of those things. Nancy goes, aren't you going to eat anything? And I said, no. And I didn't want to explain that with the cash register person, and all this. But it was one of those things where it was like, that's all the money I have. Fortunately, I did have enough, because it's really embarrassing when you say, I'll be right back, and the sandwiches are already made. There are other times when we want to give to somebody. I was on the mainland. I did something nice for somebody. They wanted to pay me. I said, you don't need to. And they said, no, I insist. And then this was the best part. They said, so just give me your Zelle number on your phone. And I said, I don't have that. Well, do you do PayPal? No, I don't do PayPal. Well, what about, and they started naming all these different things that they use to pay all their friends so that they never carry cash and they don't even have checks. I said, yeah, sorry, I don't have any of those. I said, just consider it a gift. Have a nice day. In other words, here's somebody who wanted to give me something, but there was no means by which they could give it to me. So here's God, who comforts us so that we can comfort others. And at that moment, we have no ability to receive it. By the way, if you go to non-denominational churches, you will often see people praying like this. This isn't anything that the non-denominational Pentecostal churches came up with. This is the way the Jewish nation was taught to pray. And the reason that you pray like this, these are not antennas, these are not pointers. This is simply, if I am praying for something, I must be ready to receive it. Because if I'm saying, dear God, give me food, next thing you know, it's going to be all over my head and dripping down my clothes. And so when I do this, I'm saying, God, what I pray for, I believe that I will receive. Jesus says, whatever you ask for in my name, God will give it to you. You've got the parable of the persistent widow. She goes to the judge. Judge says no. She keeps going to the judge over and over and over again. Her cause is right and just. The judge is not. And yet it says that even though he is not righteous and doesn't care about the widow, he grows weary of her bothering him. And so he finally says, enough. I grant you what you want. And then Jesus says, now, if an unjust judge is like that, what would it be like if God, who is a just judge, and you call on him? Is it possible to want something too much and be blinded by the truth? Yes. When we are going through this, we have to actually ask the question, what are we expecting and what do we want? Next slide. For all sorts of mistakes are possible when you are dealing with God. Long ago, before we were married, H was haunted all one morning as she went about her work with the obscure sense of God, so to speak, at her elbow, demanding her attention. And of course, not being a perfected saint, she had the feeling that it would be a question, as it usually is, of some unrepented sin or tedious duty, the obscure sense of God. You see, how I decide God is and what I've decided God is going to flavor how I respond to God. Before we had caller ID, you had to pick up the phone to find out who was calling you. Nowadays, we can look at it, or oftentimes my phone will say, so-and-so calling. And now, immediately, when I hear who's calling, I can decide whether I want to pick it up or not. And my decision as to whether I'm going to pick it up or not is based upon who and what I think they're going to ask me. Oh, that's so-and-so. They just want to complain. Oh, that's so-and-so. They just want to borrow something. Oh, that's so-and-so. Man, I can't wait to talk to them. And so now, with caller ID, we have the ability to determine whether or not we're going to answer a phone based upon what we think they might be calling us about. And so that day, H was wandering around. She felt this sense that God was there, that God kept asking her, I need you to pay attention. And she assumed he was going to say, do you remember 6 years ago when you did that thing and sinned? You never really repented. Or, hey, I really need you to do this, and I know you've got your day planned, but I need you to give up your day, and I need you to go take care of somebody. And so she just kept ignoring him. She just kept letting the phone ring. Next slide. At last she gave in. I know how one puts it off. And she faced God. But the message was, I want to give you something. And instantly she entered into joy. So what do we expect from God? From where do those expectations come? Have we been jaded by our experiences or the experiences of others? And is it possible to experience a reset? I think God is going to do this. I'm expecting God to do that. God has always done this. I want you to imagine Mary. The angel shows up and says, "Oh, you who are highly favored, you're going to be the mother of God." And Mary didn't say, "Oh, wait a minute. I've heard how this works in other people's lives. My friends were just telling me the other day. Oh, I read this story about..." Instead, she simply says, "May it be to me as you have said." And I think that's a rather interesting, fresh insight. Because for those of us who are old and set in our ways, God comes to us and says, "I need you to do something." And we hold up our hands and we say, "I'm sorry, God, I'm a little busy right now. I don't have time for that." I become instantly Jonah. If you're going to send somebody to the Ninevites, you send somebody else, because I don't like those people and I don't want to go and I've got a million excuses. And this is where we need a reset. And this goes back to God bolting the door. God, you always said I could come to you. Yes, I did. Then why is the door locked and bolted? Because you're not ready. What do you mean I'm not ready? I know exactly what I need. I know exactly what I want. You need to wait until you're ready. And you are not ready right now. Next slide. The door no longer shut and bolted. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, "A prison cell in which one waits, hopes, and is completely dependent on the fact that the door of freedom has to be opened from the outside is not a bad picture of Advent." Now, I want you to notice the door has to be opened from the outside. For most of us in our homes, it needs to be opened from the inside. The inside is where the lock is. But when you're in prison, it has to be opened from the outside. Change is a door that can only be opened from the inside. When we're looking at this, we began to realize that God has a plan, that God always has a plan. We may not like it, we may not understand it, we may want Him to do things differently, but God has a plan. And so when we are looking at answering questions, especially ones about grief and mourning, we have to understand that there's a way to do it. Next slide. From locked door to mystery. Now, notice. First, we got to the door and it was locked. We're not happy. But now we're going from a locked door that is no longer bolted. And by the way, notice he didn't open it right up. But now we're going to a mystery. And by the way, mysteries are not to be solved. This is not the Hallmark Channel. Mysteries, when it comes to God, are often simply to be lived in. Next slide. The gradual coming of daylight. Did you ever know, dear, how much you took away with you when you left? You have stripped me even of my past, even of the things we never shared. I was wrong to say the stump was recovering from the pain of the amputation. I was deceived because it has so many ways to hurt me that I discover them only one by one. Grief is made up of layers. One of our service dogs went to a service member who lost his legs in an IED. And we were working through it, and one day he was sitting there and he says, "It's the craziest thing." And I had heard this and I'd seen it on TV, but I'd never been sitting with someone. And I said, "What's the craziest thing?" He says, "My foot itches." And of course, I immediately looked down, knowing that he didn't have a foot. But I still looked, and he says, "Yeah, that's my problem too." He says, "I know that my foot itches. In my brain, I know that I don't have a foot there anymore. But it still itches." And of course, some neurologists explained to him that the nerve ending that would have gone to his foot is still active. It just doesn't go all the way to the foot anymore. And so really, and listening to him explain this, and I was like, I just can't imagine having a foot that itches and knowing that there's no foot there. And so C.S. Lewis says, even the things that we didn't share, because remember, she came into his life when he was much older. Most of his life was lived without her. And yet he said her death affected those things as well as the things they shared. And every time he thinks he's almost gotten to the point where he can take the next step, he discovers another one, because they aren't all out there. They're coming out. And so grief is made up of layers. Next slide. 5 stages outlined by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, healthy framework. First, denial, initially refusing to believe the lost. Anger, feeling upset or frustration with the situation or people involved. Bargaining, trying to make deals with the loss. Depression, feeling overwhelmed, hopeless, and withdrawn. Acceptance, coming to terms with the loss and finding ways to live with it. Nancy and I started watching a show, and it's about an Australian couple. The wife dies, and the husband decides to pack up his teenage children and move them to New Zealand, to a place he used to spend some time in the summer. And everybody thinks it's a terrible idea. Everybody's against it. Then he gets there and everything goes wrong. And anyway, but it's interesting. They're sitting at the table one night, and they mention Dr. Kubler-Ross. And he says, what are you doing? He says, well, when we went to counseling, the counselor told us about these 5 stages. And so we knew that, Dad, you didn't want to listen to us, but we came up with the signal. And so every time you did something, every time you said something, we would basically say, stage 2, stage 4, stage 1. And he says, what are you talking about? And they're trying to explain to him. And so the son, by the way, explains to him all the stages of grieving. And he says, right now you're in stage whatever it was. And the husband is lost at this because he doesn't want anyone to categorize what he's going through. Next slide. See, the term layers of grief refers to grief being complex and multifaceted, because grief often exposes other hurts and pains. This loss doesn't necessarily, this is not just what you're dealing with. You're also dealing with all of these other things, whether you recognize them or not. And so this has brought to the surface pains and hurts and things that go way back, some of which you've never thought about, some of which you didn't think was a big deal, or you told people wasn't a big deal. But this has now brought to the occasion all of these things. And then I think perhaps the hardest is grief is not linear. You're not going to start at stage 1, 2, 3 and work all the way through it. You're going to go hopping around. A lot of people, by the way, go straight to 5. Everything's hunky-dory. They go back to their life, they go back to work, and then one day, everything comes off the train tracks. And there's this derailed mess, and they're trying to pick it up. And this is where we need people in our lives that can help us say, what you're going through is okay. To say it's normal, it is. Most people don't want to hear this. I'm not normal. You're right. When I'm working with people, by the way, who have been put on medication because they are bipolar, schizophrenic, they will always tell me, when I'm on the medication, I do not feel like myself. And you have to explain to them, because what doctors and family members often use is the only words they know. Yes, but that makes you normal. When you take the medication, you're normal. And these individuals are like, I don't want to be normal. If that's normal, I don't want to be normal, because normal doesn't feel right. And it's a very hard thing to explain to people. And so instead of using the word normal, it helps you process. It helps you see. Because do you understand that when you had that episode last week, you scared everybody? I even scared myself. Okay, this medication is going to help you process this. This medication is going to help you so that that type of day doesn't happen again. And you're right. You're not going to feel right. It's just like when we get an infection and the doctor hands us those wonderful antibiotics, and then he lists all the side effects. You're going to deal with these. Well, doctor, I don't want to. Well, you don't have a choice. You either deal with these or you're not going to get better. And so when we are going through this process of grieving, we must understand that there's no such thing as normal. Not ever again. We will always get closer to normal, but we will never get back to what we call normal. We can't. If this person meant that much to us, it would be impossible for us to claim that we now have a normal life without them. Even if we get remarried, even if all things, change, we're never going to go back to the way it was. Next slide. Still, there are two enormous gains. I know myself too well now to call them lasting. Turn to God, my mind no longer meets that locked door. Turn to H, it no longer meets that vacuum, nor all that fuss about my mental image of her. Remember we talked about that? He says, I can't have her living in my memory because my memory is not right. And he says it would be like committing adultery because it's not her. I've created this different person. But he says, now all of a sudden, confronted with God in H, I'm beginning to see a whole new thing. And he says, now the door is unlocked. And I'm beginning to sense that eventually I'm going to step through the door and something's going to change. Now the question is whether it's how I feel, how I see things, how I understand things, or all of the above. And this is now what he's struggling with. Next slide. Notice C.S. Lewis turned to God and to H. If one is only focusing on God or the lost, there is no continuity. One has to embrace both at the same time. We tend to focus all on God. God, fix me, heal me, take care of me. I miss you so much. I went for a walk. I slept on your side of the bed. I did this and this and this. Dear God, I'm still hurting. Please. I remembered yesterday was your birthday and I took flowers and laid them on your grave. And as long as we are dealing with the two separately, we no longer see the continuity of the two. We haven't asked the question about what was lost and why it matters. You see, when we lose someone, and we have to say something, because there are sometimes some things, we lose them on multiple levels, and the losses can be multiplied. Family, children, business, money, responsibility, stability. In other words, it is not just that the person is no longer with us. It is the fact that now we have to take on additional roles. We have to handle different responsibilities. We have to do things that we have never had to do before. We have to face things alone. And by the way, we no longer have anyone to fight with so that we can come to a point where we say, having fought, I now understand what's important. And so all of these things are part of it. And we rarely say this. We rarely pop out and say, well, God, I'm really sad because now I don't have a paycheck. Or I'm going to have to give the house up because I can't afford it. Or, I was never good at balancing the checkbook. Or, man, now I've got to get the kids to school and still get to work on time. Rarely do we, all of those things are simply built into, I miss them. Last slide. My jottings show something of the process, but not so much as I'd hoped. Perhaps both changes were really not observable. There was no sudden striking and emotional transition, like the warming of a room or the coming of daylight. When you first notice them, they have already been going on for some time. Now, most of us only see the changes after close family and friends see them. In other words, people see changes taking place in us long before we see them, accept them, and embrace them. And since what we are moving towards is a new normal, the comfortableness is expected. So as we move into it, it may not be as noticeable. In other words, I have been praying over and over again to feel better, to not hurt as much, to be able to do some things I used to do. And so when we're able to do those things, rarely do we stand up and say, aha, I'm doing them again. Rather, because we always did them, and now we are doing them again, we're suddenly feeling just a tiny bit more normal. We're never going to get back to the old normal, but we feel a tiny bit more normal. Now we're going to leave off here today because this is what C.S. Lewis is struggling with. when I accept this, does that mean I didn't love her? Or I've gotten over her? Or she's no longer necessary in my life? And this is what he's got to struggle with. As long as I am broken, as long as I can't handle things, as long as I am grieving and wearing black, then it shows how much I loved her. But if I start to wear my normal clothes and start going out, start taking care of myself and others, what will that say about her and the relationship that I told everybody we had? Go in peace, serve the Lord in gladness, and have a fantastic day.